Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's session. Before we start, just a few logistics things. We will be recording the first half of the session, which is the talking part and the sharing our wonderful presentation. But when we go to the Q&A section, we will stop recording. And the portion that we'll be recording, we will be sharing that through our different platforms that we use. So without further delay, I want to start today's session, which I'm very excited about. So নমস্কার, প্রণাম, সালাম, আমি আবু আরিফ। আমি একজন বাঙালি। বাংলা আমার মাতৃভাষা। আমি বাংলাদেশে জন্মেছি। আম আমি এখন কথা বলছি সেন্ট জনস, নিউফারল্যান্ড থেকে। এই ভূমি মিকমা ও বিহথক জাতির চিরায়ত এলাকা। একটি ভূমি যা গণহত্যা, প্রকৃতি হত্যা এবং জ্ঞান হত্যার নীরব সাক্ষী হয়ে আছে। আমি একজন queer মানুষ, একজন বিচিত্র লিঙ্গ ও প্রেম ভাষার ধারক। প্রবাসী, শিক্ষক, গবেষক। আর আমার ১ম প্রেম ছিল আমাদের পাড়ার এক বাঙালি ছেলে। আমার শরীর, ভাষা, ভালোবাসা সবটাই বহন করে অভিবাসনের, উপনিবেশের আর প্রতিরোধের গল্প। Welcome to Welcome to this timely and vital session, Navigating Intersectionality, Policy and Activism, Queer International Students in the Global North, hosted by the Early Career Researchers Group of the Research with International Students Network in collaboration with the Critical Internationalization Studies Network. This panel is not just a collection of presentation. It is a constellation of lived experiences, intellectual interventions, and collective strategies for refusing erasure. Chaired by Dr. Lisa Brunner, today we will hear from Dr. Campbell, Mohit Dudeja, Fatemeh Gharibi, and Tori Yang, four brilliant scholars whose work sheds light on the entangled and often precarious condition of queer international students navigating settler colonial institutions, shifting immigration regimes, and community marginalization. We acknowledge that the increasing hostility towards both queer and migrant communities in the global north is not simply circumstantial. It is produced and sustained by policies and systems that prioritize whiteness, violent nationalism, and heteronormativity. Our task today is not just to observe, but to listen deeply, feel collectively, and organize differently. As you listen, I invite you to consider whose stories are we still not hearing? What forms of care and resistance emerge from at the margins? And before I pass this mic to Dr. Lisa Brunner to lead a wonderful conversation and presentations, I would like to read a few lines from a poem by Rabindranath Tagore. I read this. Really, it's an offering, hoping for different possibilities for queer international students or racialized bodies in these settler colonial spaces. Possibilities that haven't perhaps yet been seen, heard, or imagined, but like a quiet ray of hope with all these works, something beautiful and different is undoubtedly brewing. And I'm not going to read the whole poem, parts of it in Bengali, but the full poem is in the screen. আমি দেখি নাই তার মুখ, আমি শুনি নাই তার বাণী, কেবল শুনি ক্ষণে ক্ষণে তার পায়ের ধ্বনিখানি। আমার দ্বারের সম্মুখ দিয়ে সেজন করে আসা যাওয়া, শুধু আসন পাতা হলো আমার সারাটা দিন ধরে, ঘর হয়নি প্রদীপ জ্বালা, তারে ডাকিব কেমন করে, আছি পাবার আশা নিয়ে, তারে হয়নি আমার পাওয়া। আসুন আমরা কল্পনা করি একটি ভবিষ্যৎ যেখানে বিচিত্রতা বোঝায় শক্তি, ভালোবাসা মানে মুক্তি, আর উচ্চশিক্ষা হয় সম্পর্ক আর ন্যায়ভিত্তিক। আসুন প্রত্যয় নেই উচ্চশিক্ষার আসল গন্তব্য হবে ক্ষমতা আর ভাষার বাইরে, বরং সম্পর্ক নির্ভর, কল্পনাশীল এবং ন্যায়ের উপর দাঁড়ানো। Without further delay, all floor is yours, Lisa.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction to the session. I really appreciate that you added some sense of hope and positivity to this moment of kind of escalating hostility towards both queer communities and migrants that are really is across borders and institutions and ideologies. We know that in the United States, we're witnessing a resurgence of nationalist and xenophobic policies, and this includes visa cancellations, detentions of international students, bans on gender affirming care, executive orders that criminalize protests and erase or attempt to erase queer existence. Um, they're also not isolated incidents to the US. Cis heteropatriarchy does not know borders, and it's not just in the US, but elsewhere. They're actions that are really part of a broader project of exclusion that seeks to police who belongs, who is visible, and who is protected. And queer international students sit at the intersection of these forces, really navigating systems that often render them as hypervisible as targets, sometimes invisible within the very communities that should be offering support and solidarity. So today's panel brings together four scholars whose research confronts these tensions head on in different ways. We're going to hear about the lived experiences of queer international students as they move through pre arrival uncertainty, institutional marginalization, and post graduation precarity. And we'll also talk about what it means to exist in queer spaces that don't reflect your racial or cultural identity, but also in communities that may not affirm your queerness. We'll look at some of the failures of internationalization to center equity, and I hope that's a conversation that we can potentially have in the Q&A session, and also explore what it takes to build solidarity in this time of fragmentation. And for many of us, it's not just an academic conversation; it's personal. It's about survival and resistance, and as I hope we can see also, it could be about reimagining structures that have too often demanded assimilation, silence, or disappearance. I've been looking forward to hearing from the speakers for a very long time, and I'm happy that this moment is finally here. I'm going to read the bios of the four speakers in the order that they'll be presenting. The first speaker is Anne Campbell, who's an independent consultant and scholar working on projects related to international higher education and student mobility, international scholarship programs, diplomacy, social change, and climate justice. She was an associate professor at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California, and a U.S. Fulbright scholar in Kosovo working with the Ministry of Education to support higher education policymaking. Anne has consulted on higher education issues for UNESCO, USAID, several governments, and private foundations, and has a PhD in comparative and international development education and an MA in critical theory and cultural studies. Currently, she's writing a book titled Finding Freedom Queer International Students in the United States, which focuses on students who come from countries without legal protections for LGBTQ citizens. Next, we will have Mohit Dudeja. Mohit is an international student in Thunder Bay, Canada, and is a passionate educator, activist, and scholar pursuing a PhD in educational studies at Lakehead University. Their research explores the experiences of queer international students in small Canadian cities, bringing academic inquiry with lived realities, bridging academic inquiry with lived realities. As a contract lecturer, Mohit teaches courses like activism and education and queer studies, fostering critical engagement with activism, advocacy, and social justice. They are also the founder and president of MendLife Foundation India and MendLife Canada, and a devoted advocate for 2S LGBTQ+ and BIPOC communities, striving to foster equity through education, activism, and empowerment. Next, we have Fatemeh Gharibi. Fatemeh is a PhD candidate in gender, feminist, and women's studies at York University, Canada Occupied Land. Their interdisciplinary research encompasses international education, feminist and sexuality studies, as well as theater and performance studies. Fatemeh adopts an activist scholarship and approach, utilizing research-based theater to amplify the voices of women, queer, and trans people of color. In their PhD project, they contribute to the young field of political international student studies by exploring how LGBTQ international students navigate activism and political engagement in Canada during a time of rising far right politics worldwide. And finally, we'll hear from Tori Yang, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology at the University of British Columbia and a Fox International Fellow at Yale University. Her research interests include migration, gender, sexuality, and social theory. Her dissertation examines how migrants negotiate multiple identities as they relocate from one country to another, and how, in turn, those identities impact their transnational trajectories. Her work has been published in journals including Social Problems, International Migration Review, and Gender and Society. She has an MA in Social Sciences and a BA in History. Without further ado, let's welcome our amazing panelists, and we will hear from Anne first. So thank you so much for joining, and over to Anne.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Good to see you all, and I'm really glad to be here in community with you today. So I will share my screen. Can you see it? Yes, great. Thank you so much. So as Lisa said, my name is Anne Campbell, and I use she, her pronouns. You're welcome to just call me Anne. Today my task is really to set a landscape for the presenters who will come after me. So I hope that I'm offering points that help to situate the conversation. I want to say that I'm joining you from Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the United States. These are the unceded lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. And I identify as a cisgendered woman and a heterosexual. So I am very happy to be included in the community, and I am grateful for the invitation. This research and the work that I've been doing is really motivated by my love and care for many people in the queer community, in my family, and many former students. So I'm very grateful for the inclusion, and thank you for having me. Today I'll be talking about the literature review that was conducted and released in 2024, a bit about queer migrations and imagined futures, hopefully laying a good landscape for what's to come. So I want to begin by talking a bit about who are queer international students. The work that I've been doing really builds from the work of Sumara and Davis, who have talked about queer individuals being collectively denied the cultural rewards afforded to those whose public performance of self are contained within a narrow band of behaviors considered proper to a heterosexual identity, and I extend that to a cisgendered identity. And so I'm really interested in the position in society of queer international students and the ways that they are supported and oppressed, especially around policies in the United States. And to define queer international students, a team and I have worked on this definition. A student who is enrolled at a college or university in a country other than their country of citizenship, and who self-identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, or any other marginalized sexual or gender identity or expression. And this can be at any point in their life. So really speaking to the queer theory idea of change of identity over time. So the work I'm speaking about today comes from this study. I put the QR code there in case that's of interest. It's open access. And I wrote this with Jordan Dezago and Quintessence Townsend, who were two graduate students at the time at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in California. So we looked at literature across disciplines about students who had traveled for higher education in a different country. We were interested in the theories that were used, their motivations for international education, challenges faced, and how the university responded. And we looked at literature from that was published between 2012 and 2022, and started with 96 articles, and then based on our criteria, ended up with 30. I will say that it is amazing how much literature has come out since this band of time, and so it's really exciting for the field to know that there's a lot more work now. And I want to start actually with citing one of the papers in our lit review. Nguyen and Yan had found and told the story of Han, a transgender woman, a female student from Korea, who, quote, revealed that the main reason for her coming to the US was to try to become a successful transgender professional, something that she considered impossible in her home country. And I want to start with that to really emphasize the optimism and the motivation to pursue overseas education. I think it's often takes a back seat to some of the other literature, but I wanted to start on this optimistic note of kind of searching for opportunity through education. So a few quick points, the select key findings from our literature review. So we looked, as I mentioned, across disciplines, and we're surprised to find that the term queer was actually used in 23 out of the 30 studies. This was not or separate from the idea of queer theory, that this was queer used as an adjective, a noun, and a verb. We were under the impression that queer was very much a North American construct, but it was refreshing to see it used, or interesting to see it used across multiple contexts. And then we also looked at the theories used to understand this literature. Intersectional identity or identities theories were most common. And then the second most common was queer theory. I'm guessing the audience is familiar with these two theories, but in case they're new to you, intersectional identity really builds on the work of Kimberly Crenshaw and highlights the idea that a person holds multiple identities and that this leads to different forms of oppression and discrimination. And then queer theory, there are many great scholars who have contributed to this theory. I pulled from Judith Butler, but the idea that queer theory being a critical framework that challenges normative ideas of both gender and sexuality and deconstructs them and really looks at how these categories are socially constructed and fluid rather than fixed and binary. And then the third thing I want to highlight is that across the board, there are many reports of queer international students reporting marginalization on their campuses or in international education systems. And they often feel like they are a minority group within a minority community. So feeling kind of this double marginalization of being an international student and being a queer student, and how that definitely shapes their experiences in university. There's also additional challenges. I don't want to spend too much time highlighting these, but I mean, they're important, but I have some other points that I'd like to raise. And a few of them include a distinct difference of experiences based on the home country. In a lot of my work, I'm looking at students who come from countries without broad legal protections for LGBTQ communities, and so a student coming, from France to Canada is having a very different experience than a student coming from Afghanistan to the U.S., for example. A fact that many of the students are out to select groups, although not all of them. And this leads to a lot of code switching, especially to protect identities from family back home and online. Students reported they're facing discrimination on their campuses, but also off campus. So commuting to campus in their housing with diasporic groups or religious groups. And then additional challenges around preparing to graduate. So what does the future hold? Will they go home? Will they go back in the closet if they go home? Or are they going to go on to an employment situation that is open and free or not? And where might that be? So I want to take a moment here to highlight this quote that comes from another study in the Lit Review. Tan and Wang highlight how most students that they know are not, most LGBTQ international students that they know are not out. This also seems to be a point that is raised in the current work that I'm doing, that a lot of the queer international students in my study have not come out. And that they remain in stealth because they're afraid of possible discrimination or stigma. And that they write, quote, until the university is competent in providing support for LGBTQ international students, it is likely that the visibility of these students will continue to be low. And the work that I pull from, at least in the US, has incoming university students reporting that they are LGBTQ between 17 and 33% of new incoming students. So it's quite a large group, although we have no solid numbers on international students specifically. So I want to highlight just 3 points before I pass it on to the next speaker. There's a couple of promising and hopeful approaches moving forward. One is this paper that came out in 2022. Maybe some of you are familiar with it, by Lowe and colleagues. And this paper showed that 9 students from Turkey had a very rewarding experience in higher education in North America. This really bucks the trend, and some reasons were cited that they were actually quite well prepared for what a Western higher education environment might be. Through high school and other activities, they had a strong sense of self-acceptance and multiple coping strategies. Secondly, they also had gained multiple thinking tools and reflection and metacognition. They had access to a liberal curriculum and to LGBTQ affirming information at their universities. And then their cohort model really supported them. So they used each other as a support network in their US or in their North American studies. And this is a great article to really highlight how it could be done well. 2 final points for me. I've really been reading a lot about the queer migration literature. I'm not a migration scholar, but I've found that there's a lot of similarities between the queer migration literature and the international student migration literature. I know many of you are familiar with this as well. It's helped me to really think about how students are on a migration pathway with the university just being one stop in that pathway. And really bringing to attention some of the other factors that help to support their choices and their community while they're overseas. And then also thinking about what happens afterwards. This is the area of my research, post-graduation, and really thinking about kind of these bonded agreements around scholarships or visas that force people to migrate out of a country, that force people to go home to fulfill a bond, and how those really disrupt a queer migration. Or at least interrupt a queer migration. And then a lot of students, at least in my study, who are reporting that they
Hey, Nick,
will
I'm good. How are you?
plan to leave again
Happy Friday,
after.
first of all. And secondly, I'm trying to work.
Sorry. Is that just oh, thank you. And then those who return home are planning to leave again. And then finally, I want to highlight some research by Munoz around queer futurity. This is really an act of imagining a future where queer communities like queer international students can live more openly in open societies and in ways that are not so common today. Queer international students paint a beautiful picture of a welcoming and inclusive campus, preparation for a rewarding career where they can be out, having positive relationships and not having to hide those relationships, and then also not worry about a precarious visa situation. And then the next steps around that. And I think we can reach that, but universities really, I think, need to be more aware of, supportive of, and transparent about the reality for queer international students, especially those who are not out or who are not planning to come out, and especially those from countries without broad legal protections. And so I think I will just leave it there. I'm happy to share the slides and the references. And thank you very much for your time. And Mohit, I think I'm passing it to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Lisa, for the wonderful introduction of all of us. And thank you, Anne, for setting the stage and sharing your insightful findings. Hi, everybody. My name is Mohit Dudeja, and I go by any and all pronouns, and especially because I believe that we need to just dismantle this whole idea of gender to bring the gender equality on plane. And that's more of a theoretical idea, while I also understand how specific pronouns can be very important for certain people to resist what has been dictated to us, right? So when you were sharing your findings, and I was thinking about my own study in my mind, and I realized that there were many common themes, like everything that you shared was something that I experience in some ways being a queer international student, and I also find my participants sharing. So today, what I'm going to talk about is something that I have found based on my own experience and also like preliminary findings of my own study. I have not come across a single study that is on the experiences of queer international students in small cities, let alone small Canadian cities. Even if I talk about queer international students in Canada in general, there are not many studies. There are a bunch of dissertations, PhD or master's dissertations, or like a very few papers, but nothing really much. When it comes to like for instance, I was seeing how you like the experiences that you were talking about from your literature review, I feel that those have been significantly impacted in the current times, given what's happening in the US. And especially queer students as well as queer international students having that double marginalization are under threat, a significant threat that is. I am currently in the interviewing stage of my study, and I did not plan on asking any question about what's happening in the US initially. And as that this is happening, it's just organically coming up. Everybody just comes to that within the first 15 to 20 minutes of a conversation, because that's how significantly it is impacting them, even from a distance, but also, thinking about what's happening to our fellow queer people in the United States. Um, I believe that, sorry, so even in Canada, how people are scared about what's happening in the US, because the political ideology that is getting dominant there right now, that's also traveling to Canada through people, but also through politics. And people are absolutely scared. Now, there's already so much that international students go through, the level of marginalization, the uncertainties, the threats, especially what happened in the last couple of months in Canada. Like every day the minister will wake up, will say, good morning, today we are changing this policies. Even for people who are already here and who planned everything based on the current policies, we don't care. Now you just find whatever you want to do with the new policies. For instance, this English language requirement for the work permit, which was never there. But then suddenly one day they woke up and said, even if you're here already, you need to now give another English language test to apply for your post-graduation work permit. Um, Now, that's a common problem for all international students. And there's already this whole mental health issue that is going on. Now, over to that, there are so many additional layers of stress that queer international students go through, and they're not even recognized as a marginalized group. They're not even recognized as a group that exists that has separate needs than from international students. And when I'm saying they, I'm basically referring to my participants, but I also find myself included in that population. So some of the things that I found was that the first thing was that I asked about the support or visibility that they found on campus, and everybody said there are two terms that people used, one or the other. One was whitewashed, the other was Canadianized. That is that the queer spaces on campus, and especially in small cities that I'm talking about. And when I'm saying small cities, the cities with population less than 100,000 people, or between 100,000 and 150,000 people. Especially because recently Canada's population, especially the temporary resident population, has increased, but the support system has not changed at all. So earlier cities that were like 100,000 people were considered small. Now it's the 150,000 people also. That's the same small city, because the number of immigrants have risen, but the support system has not changed at all. So these people specifically mentioned that some of them try to be on those pride spaces on campus, but some of them did not even try to go there. Why? Because those who went there did not really find included, and myself included there, because I even worked at Pride Space on campus, but I did not see a single event that was there, especially including queer international student or queer people of color. Um, Apart from that, sorry. there is many students said that we are not afraid of homophobia as much as we are afraid of racism, because we are straight passing. So we don't really catch attention of people in that sense, but we can't hide our color. We can't hide the way we look. And especially in the city, especially places which are mostly white dominated, and in small cities the immigrant population is lesser than in larger cities. So there racism is actually much more than that is in the larger cities. Now that's not to discount that there's no racism in the larger cities, but it's like the isolation for immigrant population, especially international students, is actually much more than that in larger cities. So that was also one of the findings. The other thing that you mentioned in your findings, and that it's most of your participants in the work that you reviewed found it easier to come out to, or to uh, share about their sexuality, to disclose their sexuality to their friends. But what I found here in small cities in Canada was that it was extremely difficult for them to disclose their sexuality to people from their own communities or their own countries. So, for instance, if I'm from India, it will be very difficult to disclose my sexuality to people from India specifically, but it'll be rather easier to disclose to people from other countries or Canada itself. Um, Now, this is for various reasons, and I'll share one of my own experiences here, that just in the first few months of moving to Thunder Bay for my PhD, I had long nails and nail painted them. Um, I was bullied by fellow Indian students on campus. Uh, and they basically found it funny. And that's not something new for me, because that's something that I had been facing throughout my life in India, not for painting my nails, because I did not have the courage to do that in India. But I thought that after moving to Canada, this is something that I'll be free to do. But not really, because homophobia travels across the border, right? So it traveled with people from my community itself. And I think that's one of the reasons I have like detailed stories of these people experiencing homophobia from their own community members, like from people from their own countries, and that's some of that is very harsh. Now, especially in smaller cities where already people from a particular country are not in majority, like there are hardly a bunch of people that you can find from your own country. It is difficult. It's like they feel like they don't belong to the queer community because it is predominantly white or Canadianized, and they don't belong to their own home country's community because they don't fit in well there, because they're queer. Right? So that's also one of the major findings. Um, Apart from the social sciences or education kind of disciplines, many other disciplines did not include queerness in their curriculum or pedagogy at all. Especially if I talk about STEM, students mentioned that there was no mention of queerness in the curriculum, no examples at all. When I was in India, I was basically exploring through my master's the possibility of querying the pedagogy and curriculum in Indian higher education. And I thought at the time that it'll be different in Canada. In some aspects, yes, it is. At least it is included in the social sciences. I know what I teach, I always include examples, but I also know like how other professors also include a major queer portion in their pedagogy and curriculum. But in STEM, and all the participants that I've interviewed so far, they mentioned that it is completely absent. Um, and that's something. So when we start a conversation, the first thing that I ask them is that, why did you choose Canada? And many of them, I would say, except one so far, everybody has said that one of the reasons was that they knew that this is a queer friendly country and that they will be able to live with peace here. But at the same time, they get shocked when there is a bomb threat on Thunder Bay Public Library during the drag queen story time. They are shocked when the town of Mo says that we will not recognize the Pride Month in our town. So when this happens in a country like Canada, it doesn't just come with shock, but also with hopelessness that where is it that we can find our haven then? There is so much to say. There are so many stories. The I think I would still want to end on a positive note that I think spaces like these give us hope and also take our voices to a platform where we can start resonating from, and we can start uh, building a movement, building a fight. I've always been a fighter. I think this is how the activism start. My whole PhD study itself is my form of activism. That's what I believe. I mean, so that's where I resonate so much with Bell Hooks' quotes, where they say that they came to theory desperate to find solutions to all the problems that they were facing in their life. So. On that note, I would say let's continue these conversations and let's not leave them here. Let's not only talk about the problems, but also fight for addressing these problems and eventually leading to a place where we can say that queer international students are finally happy, included, and safe. Thank you. I'll pass it to, I forgot. So I'll let you do that, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay, yes, next we have Fatima.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm excited to be here and share this panel with you all. Thank you for everyone who made it happen. Thank you for sharing your exciting finding with us. It's so generous. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mohit. Especially, I really resonate with a lot of findings that you actually shared with us from your amazing study. And thank you for ending on an activism note, because my research is on queer and trans-identifying activists with international student status. I begin with a personal land acknowledgement and a brief overview of my research, highlighting the significance of international student activism and the insights that focusing on gender and sexuality can offer here. I am an uninvited guest on Toronto, colonially known as Toronto. Today, Toronto is covered under Treaty 13 and Williams Treaties. It is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. I'm grateful that I can live, work, and learn on this land. I recognize that I arrived here from Iran on a student visa, a pathway created and controlled by the nation state, like other migration pathways, without consultation with indigenous nations and aimed at furthering their displacement and dispossession. Although my migration is a result of colonization on our lands and cultures, including colonization through the construction of gender binary and heterosexuality as natural and normal, I am still complicit in an ongoing settler colonial project by not being able to completely refuse to participate in it. Similarly, I acknowledge that I am here because of my privileges. Many of my peers cannot afford to continue their academic activities being directly or indirectly affected by genocides, wars, climate disasters, and other crises. This includes the students who lost their universities, homes, or even their lives, and those who advocated for them and were targeted as a result. Acknowledgement may not change this reality, but it is better than silence. My research overview. I focus on queer and trans-identifying activists, as I said, who are international students in the Greater Toronto area using a multimodal method I currently call participatory playwriting. My goal is to create a space for activism and community building amidst rising anti-immigrant and anti-LGBTQ sentiments and as others mentioned. I plan to conduct semi-structured interviews with 10 to 20 participants. We will collectively review transcripts and select resonance prompts to co-create a play or performance. Art-based participatory methods, particularly theater and performance, are crucial for envisioning queer future, as Anne referred to Munoz, challenging oppressive systems and fostering activism, providing a platform for connection and storytelling. I hope we can discuss these methods further on another occasion, maybe after my fieldwork, hopefully. International student activism. International students are often seen as politically passive, despite their lives being deeply influenced by the political agendas of their home and host countries. However, the scholarship in the edited collection that I recently reviewed, International Student Activism and the Politics of Higher Education, edited by Cindy and Rose Redwood and Ruben Rose Redwood, reveals how international students have historically shaped political discourse, both locally and globally. A notable example is the policy change, as Mohit said, on postgraduate work permits and international student cap introduced in Canada in 2023. This policy affected students who had entered Canada under different rules, leading to migrant workers who were former international students camping outdoors for nearly 150 days in the harsh Canadian winter to protest the unjust implications. Solidarity events organized by student unions at York University further amplified their cause. And currently, as Lisa said, Trump administration's revocation of visas for hundreds of international students, many of whom were advocating for Palestine, underscores the impact of international student activism. Despite being labeled destabilizing by the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, these actions highlight the significant influence international students have on political dynamics in their host countries. So now, why gender and sexuality matter in this conversation here? I can think of 4 reasons. First, as Jean Harita Warren argues, gender and sexuality shed light on regulating and imprinting power on the body and how we experience and negotiate power. And David Murray, one of my profs, argues that the study of sexuality reveals the nation state's gatekeeping mechanisms, citizenship processes, identity formation, and their unequal impact on migrants with LGBTQ plus identities. Therefore, delving into gender and sexuality is essential for comprehending the nuanced dynamics that shape individual and collective experiences in response to oppressive structures, which is important when we want to understand political activism. Let me share an example I witnessed. This story is public information, but I anonymized it to be respectful to those students. 3 student unions at a university in the Greater Toronto area wrote a collective statement condemning the new wave of atrocities in the occupied Palestine in October 23. The university administration responded violently, threatening to decertify the student unions if they did not apologize for defending the right of the people of Palestine to resist their colonizers. The university admin immediately suspended 5 out of 6 student union executive members from their teaching assistantship jobs. The 6th person who didn't get banned because they didn't have a contract, actually. Who were they? 1 cis man, 3 cis women, 1 transgender person, 4 current, and 1 former international student. All racialized and all from Muslim majority countries. This is further evidence of how actively international students are involved in unions. In addition to the university admin, many other groups either supported or condemned the union's statement. One local news outlet specifically published the students' names, pictures, and bios, condemning them under the rhetoric of supporting Hamas. They also shamed the students using the rhetoric of "this is Canada" and labeling them as ungrateful immigrants. In the comments section, users made sexist, racist, and transphobic slurs. For example, one user wrote, referring to cis women, that they should go back to their country, they deserve to be forced to wear a hijab. In targeting the transgender person, one user mocked their they them pronouns and wrote that they should go back to their country where they cannot be out as a trans person. Here, not covering their heads as Muslim women and trans identity are both associated with progress, while supporting the people of Palestine is seen as backwardness. In these two short comments, Islamophobia, racism, and homonationalism are at play. Such responses seem rare when it comes to white Canadian citizens, including white queers who support Palestine. From a critical race theory lens, whiteness can erase the migrant background, as Tobani says. If we think about Jasper Parr's theory of homonationalism, for those who are white and queer, their whiteness makes them the so-called good gay. So therefore, they may not be targeted as ungrateful immigrants or bad gays who do not deserve Canada. The second reason that focusing on queer and trans students in this case is important is due to the rise of anti-LGBTQ sentiments in Canada, as Mohit highlighted it very well and shared the examples. I will not go through that much. International students who identify as LGBTQ may have chosen to study Canada specifically as a pathway to a safe environment, as both Anne and Mohit said. And this new wave of anti-LGBTQ hate may affect these students' safety and well-being, and also impact their practices of activism, obviously. And the third reason of importance of focusing on queer and trans international students is important here because, well, it's due to my positionality and the ethical practice of doing research with peoples or communities we share identities and experiences with. The closest population to me in Canada right now is queer and trans international students with anti-oppressive views. I could not feel closely connected to most dominantly white queer organizations due to their ignorance of our struggles, nor could I, as an Iranian even, connect to most queer Iranian organizations due to our political disagreements. Some of them are promoting the return of monarchy to Iran, supported by Canada's Conservative Party. Others have either been supporting Israel's pinkwashing project or have been silent regarding the genocide in Palestine. In her tourist assemblages, homonationalism in queer times, Puar also discusses that how queerness can be both a site of resistance and a complicity within nationalist and imperialist frameworks. Instead, I found connections and community with groups like Queers for Palestine in Toronto, Queer Muslim Network, and many amazing queer and trans activists with migrant backgrounds who weren't associated with any specific organizations for similar reasons to mine. Therefore, this research may also contribute to mapping not easily imaginable networks of solidarity and belonging. Lastly, addressing the gap in literature also makes us to focus on queer and trans international students and the activism. When it comes to these students, and there are not too many publications out there. The most relevant work that I could find is by Herridge et al. In the same book that I mentioned, and they examined the activism of LGBTQIA international students in US universities, highlighting their efforts to raise awareness about the unique challenges while navigating potential discrimination and political hostility. They show these students engage in both visible and less public forms of activism to avoid being outed, especially given potential consequences in their home countries. There are references that are not necessarily focused on activism, but give us some insight. For example, Nancy Marshall argues that having a non-cis hetero identity or mode of life has contributed to a culture of silence among LGBTQ international students who are newcomers, refugees, or immigrants. Trevor Carcam shows that there's a lack of space for international students' engagement in social and political activism on campus. I will build my research on this invaluable body of scholarship, but equally, I want my project to reflect my experience working with queer and trans migrant students who have not been silent, but tirelessly work leading organizing positions. I wish I had the consent to name them here, those active in student unions, queer organizing, labor organizing with migrant students, workers, diasporic solidarity actions with indigenous nations, and many more. I hope I reconnect with these amazing humans whom I call humble heroes through my project. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. I really love how you are able to weave in all these concepts of white supremacy, border imperialism, colonialism, both settler and exploitative, neocolonialism all together. This was excellent. And we're really grateful to have our final speaker, Tori, presenting now. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lisa, for the lovely introduction. And thank you for each and every one of the speakers. I feel very profoundly inspired by what you have shared. I really appreciate the personal stories that um, are really touching. And my research is gonna cover some of the overlapping themes as well. I'm gonna talk about intersectional marginalization that queer international students face. And in my in my talk, I think I'm gonna talk more briefly about the shared themes because the previous speakers have already spoken in details. Rather, I hope to highlight something different that stands out from my own research on a selected group of queer international students. My dissertation is looking at this group of Chinese queer international students who are highly skilled, and many of them come from more privileged background in terms of socioeconomic status. Um, and I hope to share the stories and the trajectories I've heard, and hopefully contribute to this overarching theme of the diverse experience of queer international students. So first of all, I'm gonna start with their motivation to study abroad. Many queer international students view like sexual freedom as a very significant motivator for studying abroad. For some, it is the primary motivation, but for others, it is like an added benefit. The expectation of a positive experience as a queer international student is often very optimistic, especially when compared to the prospect in their home countries, which is China that I study. And before arriving and understanding various communities that they will encounter in a foreign country, many students, their focus is primarily on the education-related factors, such as tuition fee and school reputation. Um, but today I want to focus more on the common experiences of intersectional marginalization faced by them from both their ethnic and LGBT communities after arrival. And then finally, I will talk about how the higher education sometimes do provide a space for in both it's a space for both marginalization and opportunities or empowerment. Um, so in my research as a um, member of the Chinese diaspora in Canada and the United States, many participants have expressed the need to be cautious when coming out to the Chinese community because um, many have encountered negative experience, especially from the previous generations, the older generations. And even though like co-ethnic groups sometimes are often seen as providing resources for integration, but being LGBT definitely adds complexity to this adaptation process. So instead of being a presumably welcoming community that shields international students from racial discrimination, the presence of homophobia can increase the kind of a cultural stress and leads to isolation when they first arrive. And at the same time, in the LGBT spaces, including the campus LGBTQ clubs, many complain that they are predominantly white, and many queer international students find themselves as the sole international presence in such spaces. Being both a foreigner and a person of color in the space like presents multiple challenges. For example, this include navigating the drinking and sometimes the hookup culture prevalent in North America, and facing racism in gay bars and feeling uncomfortable in gay neighborhoods. And also, additionally, there are significant cultural differences within LGBTQ groups. Many shared the story that how the LGBT clubs on campus the many members are more outspoken and political, which can be uncomfortable for some queer international students from China. And moreover, participating in political activities can pose risk of deportation in the United States, especially. This really um, relate to Fatima's presentation on the queer international students activism. And also the cultural code that are implicit in mainstream queer spaces are often overlooked by non-immigrants scholars. And so consequently, these venues cannot always be reliably considered as a viable alternative space for social bonding um, for these Chinese queer international students. And so far, I have discussed the complexity of navigating both queer and ethnic communities. So if neither is an automatic place for belonging, then the intersectional experiences of international students must be studied in their particularity. And it's important to avoid making overarching assumptions or painting a uniformly either oppressive or liberating picture for this population. And grappling with marginalized identities is inherently challenging even on a cognitive level. And in my research, I have examined how these international students make sense of their evolving identities throughout the process of transnational movement. So I found that the expressions of intersectional identities can include conflict, in which case only one single identity can be verified in a social setting, and this is often their racial identity because sexuality is more oftentimes less visible or hidden, especially when many people are straight passing. And also the second expression is like disidentification, which I found that some participants refuse all labels and distance themselves even from the LGBTQ community or distance themselves from their ethnic community because um, they think neither of these groups or identities can represent their identity as a whole. And finally, there's also indetermination when many people find it very confusing to figure out how these identities make sense. And this creates like general confusions and um, like different interpretations of grappling with the multiple identities in different contexts. Um, And finally, I don't want to only paint a grim picture. This is something that Dr. Campbell's comprehensive review of existing literature cautioned against. So although queer international students experience intersectional marginalization from both LGBT and ethnic communities, and they have very challenges grappling with their intersectional identities, many are also like feel empowered by the curriculum and knowledge about queer and feminist studies that they receive at the university, and this is something that is often well, not often but entirely censored in China. And in my research, many respondents spoke about how learning about the queerness in classroom actually encouraged them to explore their sexual identities um, in the speaking in the public setting about these topics make them more comfortable with their own exploration and reflection. So the university environment also presents a space of opportunity in this case. And also, I think intersectional marginalization is not a fixed experience throughout the student time in the host country. So I trace the ebbs and flows of their sexuality from pre-migration to post-graduation and their entry to workforce. So the social and cultural capital gained through international education after graduation sometimes can buffer them from marginalization related to their LGBT identity, especially after securing a job in the large companies, although this is a very selective group, of course. And I definitely don't want to dismiss the challenge that they face. But my point here is to highlight the joy and positive aspect of being an international student, international queer student, and this is also in line with the broader joy turn in sociology, talking about how marginalized group can also experience joy and opportunities in certain contexts. And also, like, finally, I also want to mention that many queer international students who returned to China after they graduate actually become an important force in the LGBTQ movement within China. So the implication and the experience of being a queer international student actually extend beyond the national borders and influence global LGBTQ landscapes, and many feel empowered by their knowledge and exposure to the activism that they have seen in Canada and the United States, and this changed their perspective about Chinese politics. That's something that they haven't really thought about before they leave China at a younger age. So yeah, this actually concludes my talk. I'm happy to take on Q&A later. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Arif, please go ahead.
Oh my gosh.